There we go. All right, we're going to get started. I guess it depends. Well, let's see. The light is that. If you want to leave that light on, that's because it is going to be warmer with the lights. Anyway, well, but everybody looks wide awake. I lowered the temperature is 24 degrees, so I lowered the temperature. Otherwise I'm going to fall asleep. I'm supposed to tell you that there's some kind of survey. There's some kind of class survey. Let's see. There's supposed to be some survey. Are you supposed to say about it says to improve the class. Is that I think you're supposed to give some feedback on the class. It's on the internet, so that's what you have. We'll just go. I guess I'm just supposed to tell you to go. Please go do that. So then, and I guess you'll be telling them I'm too hard. I have to do too much work, and I'm stressing you out. So but which is probably all true. But we have some people that are going on to university abroad, and hopefully they'll be ready when they go. That's part of it. The other part is, well, there's a lot of things to learn here that hopefully can be very valuable to you in the future that I want to try to teach you. And one of those is I'm going to talk about present discount value. Present discount value is a very, very important concept in finance, certainly in economics and in finance. And the reason is that it's a very important part of valuing cash flows and finding the value of things. And as I was mentioning to some of the students a little bit earlier, one of the most valuable skills that I think you can learn, a practical skill that you can learn out of this class, is the ability to analyze, to get an understanding of how to think about cash flows and how to value cash flows. It's not magic. But it is a discipline. It's a discipline. You need to think about it, and you need to, and the ability to think about it and to have that discipline is a very, very valuable skill. I talked about last week about my own career experience. Of all the things I've learned in economics, the most valuable skill that I learned was valuing cash flows. In terms of what people paid me money in order to do things. So I'm going to spend certainly most of the class today talking about that, and I'm going to go over it. I'll go over it slowly, and probably more slowly than I have in past years. I want to make sure that you understand these concepts. So these are very important concepts and very valuable. And first, I'll start. I showed you this this at the end of the class last time. I'll just go over this again to get started. That if you have some value now, what's the value? What would you need to set aside now to be worth that much in the future? What's the value of something in the future based on a current value? And so if the discount rate, the interest rate is 1%, 0.01 means 1%. In 1 year, if you have 100,000 yen, 100,000 yen 1 year in the future is worth 99,010 yen now. That's what this means. It's worth 99,010 yen now. Or, another way to put it is, if I put 99,010 yen now, and I receive a 1% return, if the interest rate is 1%, in 1 year I'll have 100,000 yen. So those are the same thing. You're saying exactly the same thing. So what this says is what the important thing here is that we're learning how to value the future. We're learning how to say something that's going to happen in the future, and we're learning how to put a price on it. And that's the very valuable thing, is that we can, with the knowledge of an interest rate and some flow, we can tell that. For example, if I have this, what this means, 95,147, 5 years at 0.01, means that if the interest rate is 1%, if I put now, today, 95,147 yen aside, if at compound interest rate, in 5 years that'll be worth 100,000 yen. That's what that means. Or, the value of 100,000 yen cash flow, 5 years in the future, if the discount rate is 1%, the value of that cash flow now is 95,147. 3%, got these values. If I put aside 86,261 yen now, and the interest rate is 3%, in 5 years it'll be worth 100,000. If I have 100,000 yen cash flow 5 years in the future, and the interest rate, the discount rate is 3%, the discount that we discount, because what discount means is how we discount the future, how we value the future. Usually we value the future less than now. I'd rather have something now than in the future. You tell me I'm going to get something 5 years from now, that's great, but I'd rather have it now. So if I have to wait 5 years, I want to get compensation for that. That's what's going on. That's the idea. So 86,261. If you set that aside now in 5 years at 3% interest rate, it's 100,000 yen. 100,000 yen now, or 100,000 yen 5 years in the future, what you would pay now. And so this is another way to say it is, if I say to you, I'll give you 100,000 yen 5 years in the future, or you could have 86,261 yen now, and you know that the interest rate is 3%, either one, you're fine. That's what that means. 5%, and you can see, the higher the interest rate, the more the future is discounted, the less valuable the future is. If you think the world's ending, if you think the world is going to end tomorrow, the day after tomorrow has no value. That's the real easy way to think about it. At some point in the future, there's very little value. And so, at 5%, you can see 10%, now you really start getting some discounting. 10%, 100,000 yen now, at 10% discount rate, if 100,000 yen 5 years in the future, if I get that cash flow 5 years in the future and my discount rate's 10%, the value is 62,092 yen now. Or if I set 62,092 yen now at a 10% interest rate, I'll get 100,000 yen 5 years in the future. So that's how you want to read these tables. These tables tell you how we value the future, and we can see that the very important thing is the interest rate. That's the most important variable, is the interest rate. And one of the things we'll see is the interest rate, or the discount rate. It's kind of the same thing. They're essentially the same. It's the same thing. The interest rate or discount rate is the most important variable. But so there's two views of present discount value. And I've talked about, and I talked about that just a moment ago. For the present, it's the amount of money we need to put aside now to get that value in the future. And the future, the amount of value we receive now, the value that we would pay for it now if we know if we're going to receive that value in the future. These are two different perspectives, and each of these perspectives allow us to, for example, set money aside with an expectation of the future value, or to take a future expected cash flow and take a price, put a value on that price now. So that's very important. That's very important, and this concept is widely used in economic and financial analysis. It gives a monetary value in the present to future cash flows. And so we're going to study two common uses of the present discount value concept: bond valuation and real estate valuation. The reason here is that these are very, very basic financial instruments. There's much more complicated financial instruments, but for you to understand how to value cash flows, it's in these you understand what these basic valuation, these basic financial instruments are and how they're valued. I'll assure you, the bond, as simple as it is, there's a complexity. Real estate is a little bit more complex, and it gets complex very quickly. So getting these down is very important. So we'll start with a bond. A bond is an IOU. If we say IOU, it just literally means IOU. See the English IOU? IOU. It's issued by some entity to pay some specific amount at some specific future date to the holder of the instrument, to the holder of the bond. So a bond is a loan. If I purchase a bond, I'm making a loan. I'm lending money. I'm a lender. I'm acting like a bank. That's what a bond is. A bond is like acting as a lender. And what a bond does, it usually specifies a flow of payments to the owner that is determined by a specified interest rate applied to a specific face value of the bond. So let's say I pull up, I buy a 100,000 yen bond, and that's what I want you to think about. We're going to talk about a 100,000 yen bond, and that means you're lending. Let's say you decide you want to lend 100,000 yen to the Japanese government, and you do that not because you want to pay taxes or anything, because it's not. You want to lend it because you want safety or returns. You may have certain reasons, but if you buy a Japanese government bond, you're essentially lending money to the Japanese government. And when you're doing that, in most bonds, for a specified interest rate to a specified face value of the bond over a specified period of time. Now, in saying that, there's also, you can have variable interest rates. Some of them are, for example, inflation indexed. And they have those now, what are called JGBs. You'll see this. The JGB is the Japanese government bond. That's JGB. That's how they're referred to. You now have JGBs that have inflation indexed. We won't talk about those. That's more complicated because that adds another variable. That's another variable. That's a little bit beyond this class. But that keep in mind that is out there. I'm not going to talk about it, but those kinds of things, those are out there. But they are more complicated. So, a bond has a maturity value. And that's the specific amount of money to be paid to the bondholder at a specific date. So that says when the bond matures, it gets to the end, there's some period. You buy the bond for a period. A lot of JGBs are 10-year. You have 10 years. So you loan money, let's say you do in July of 2017. You buy a 10-year JGB. Then at the end of 10 years, you'll get paid your money back. So, you might buy like a 100,000 yen bond. You'll get 100,000 yen back after 10 years, and then you'll get interest in what's called a coupon. And so in July of 2027, the bond would mature. That's what maturity means. So the maturity date, here at 10-year JGB, bought now, if it was issued now, would be July 2027. There's also 30-year bond. So 30-year, July, that would be July, from now, if you bought it now, would be July of 2047. I hope I'm around then. But that's a 30-year bond. But you can buy 2-year bonds, 1-year bonds. There's all kinds of bonds out there. And we'll go over some of that as well. So we got maturity value, maturity date, and this is an important concept also, duration. The duration of the bond. The duration, let's say now, if you bought a 10-year JGB, now July 2027, the duration's 10 years. Let's say 2 years from now, let's say it's July of 2019. In July 2019, 2 years from now, July of 2019, the duration of the bond will still exist. It's still out there. It hasn't matured. Its duration is then 8 years. That's what the duration is. So however the length of time until the bond matures. So the bond specifies the following: the maturity value, or the face value, the issue duration, the length of the bond term from the issue date to the maturity date, and the interest rate that we paid on the bond. As I've noted, in some cases you can get an index to inflation. But this is your standard, what you would call a vanilla, your standard vanilla bond would have these characteristics. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to use the following values to illustrate a bond: a maturity value of 100,000 yen, a duration of 10 years, a market interest rate of 2%. Now what we're going to do here, I know that's incredibly, these days that's incredibly high, and one of the things we'll be talking about today is the current interest rate market is, that what we've seen in the last 24 months is really unique, and probably unique in human history. Certainly in the history of finance, and going back, the banking goes back about 800 years. In fact, the world's oldest bank, the Italian banks date from the 13th century, the oldest, or they were set up at that time. In the entire history of issuing bonds, we have experienced the lowest interest rates ever in the history of finance in the last 24 months. So it's an interesting time to be studying this. And also what we're saying here, some bonds you can either put an initial value that's lower, and that at a discount rate, at the interest rate, will give you at maturity, so that there's no payment. Here we're assuming that you put 100,000 yen at the start, you receive a coupon, that's the interest payment, that's called a coupon. So you receive a coupon, and this is the typical structure of JGBs, is that they have a coupon. So this is the interest payment, the coupon, it's an annual payment. So if we had a 10-year bond, 100,000 yen, duration 10 years, interest rate of 2%, that means the coupon would be 2,000 yen. So that would be year one. The end of year one, we receive 2,000 yen. Present value at an interest rate of 2% is 1,960.7 yen. So what this shows is the cash flow, the present value of the cash flow. What we're doing, we're saying, when we write that down, that the value A times 0 equals the value at some times t divided by 1 plus the interest rate r raised to the t. So in let's go to year 2, we're going to receive A of 0, A of at times 0 for 2 years in the future. That's the value at time 2 divided by 1 plus the interest rate. Here it's 0.02 raised to the 2. And that 2 is 2,000. So put 2,000 in there. You run that number, it gets this, 1922.34. That's where that comes from. It's not magic, it's just numbers. It's numbers, and it's using that formula, that present value formula. Present value of 2,000 yen 2 years in the future at a discount rate of 2% is 1922.34. So now we look all down, 9 years, 10 years. At the end of 10 years, we get 100,000 yen back because the bond matures. And the interesting thing is, you add up all these present values, at that discount rate, it's exactly equal to what you paid. So that's the price of the bond. So you say, I'm giving 100,000 yen, I'm going to get this cash flow, get paid back after 10 years, at that interest rate of 2%, if that's my alternative, if that's my best alternative, I will pay 100,000 yen for that now. Well, that's what I had. It's saying I have 100,000 yen, I got 2%. What's the value of that cash flow plus getting your money back after 10 years? If the interest rate is 2%, it's 100,000 yen. 100,000 yen. It's exactly what I'm paying for it. That's how you value the bond. So that says if I'm paying a bond of 100,000 yen and it has all of these features and that cash flow, it's worth 100,000 yen. It's worth exactly what I'm paying for it. So that's when you pay for it. It's worth that. That's why you're paying that now. That's what it is. That is its value. That's why you're paying that now. That's the present value. Let me just go over that. Add that to, it's exactly equal to the maturity value of the bond. So we'd be willing to pay exactly the maturity value of the bond in the present to receive the interest payment flows in the maturity value at the bond's maturity date. We're willing to pay that. That's what that means. That's what we're willing to pay. That's its value now. But here's the interesting thing. This is important. What if the value what if the interest rate changes? What if the interest rate changes? What if this changes? Because interest rates change. If you bought the bond with a 2% discount, at a 2% interest rate, when you bought that bond, the market, that's what the market price was. That's what the market valued the future. That's what people valued the future at that moment. But that value of the future changes. It can change all the time. It can change because of a recession, or war, or new technology that makes that changes the way people do business. All kinds of sociological changes, and there's anything. There's all kinds of things that can happen that change the perception of the future, that change the interest rate. That R tells us how people value the future. So that can change. So what happens if it does change? The value of the bond changes. Not the value you receive, not the payment that you receive, because those are fixed. The bond says, I'm going to get this amount of money at the end, and I'm going to get paid this coupon. I'm going to get that. That doesn't change. But if the interest rate changes, then the market has a different valuation of that future cash flow. So if the value changes, I get the same at the end, but the value can change. The value the value changes. So for example, let's say that the market interest rate falls to 1% at the end of year one of the bond's life. Okay. So if it's, am I doing that right? Right. This is correct. This is right. Let me just make sure I'm. If it falls to 1%, then the market is saying they only want 1%. But I've got something that's worth 2%. I think let me put that aside right there. Just focus on this. So the bond now is a duration of 9 years and 9 remaining interest payments. And that the present discount value, oh, I know. If you value these, right? 4, 5, right. There should be a total. This is correct. Because it's going to value, right? That's valued at okay. The present discount value is based on an interest rate of 1%. The present discount value for year 2 is 2,000 divided by 1 plus 0.1. So it means it's greater. So that means I've got a 2%. The market only wants is willing to pay 1%, but I got something that'll give 2%. That's more valuable. So the value of the bond is increased. So the present value of the bond is increased. So the sum, because the total value of the bond is the sum of the present values over the life of the bond. And the sum of that, I'll check that to make sure, I think that's right, I'll check that to confirm. The sum of the present discount values over the remaining 9 years is 108,566. An increase of 8.57%. So if I put down 100,000, I bought a bond, a 10-year JGB, say I bought it at 2%, then the interest rate drops to 1% a year later, then that bond is more valuable because it's paying more interest. Because now I'm only getting 1%. So that one, I'm getting paid more. The market will pay me more for that. And what they'll pay is this amount. So now I've received an increase of 8.57%. The value of the bond that I purchase is worth more. So the value of the bond is 8.5% higher than the original value of 100,000 yen. And the seller has received, if I sell it, then I would have received 110,566 yen at the time of the sale. Because I would have received that 2,000 yen. So I'd have received that and then get that. So that's the increase in the value of the bond. So bonds, that's the way bonds change in value. But remember, it's important, if I just hold on to the bond, I get this. This is guaranteed. But it's my opportunity cost. And that's the thing. I'll take more money now, but I can only get, if I reinvest it, I can only get 1%. So in other words, the investment environment is such that I'm getting a lower return. But I can cash that now. And why would I do that? Well, I might think interest rates might go back up. If I thought, well, the interest rates are going to increase, if the market thinks they're going to go down, but if I think they're wrong, then I can sell it, book a profit, and if the interest rate goes back up, then I can buy the bond again and have my increase, and still be getting that interest rate. So that's and so you can also see if interest rates. That's what bond traders. People trade bonds because they're expecting interest rate changes. But so the face value of the bond has changed, but only the market value. So here, let's say if instead of 3% or 2%, the interest rate goes up to 3%. Let's say it increases to 3% interest rate. Then, the present discounted, now the market wants to pay more. Mine's worth less. My bond has lost value because I'm only getting 2%. The market's saying you made a mistake, sorry. You made a mistake. The future's worth 3% now. It's not worth 2, it's worth 3. It's worth 3%. And so what will they pay for that bond since the future is worth more and what I'm going to receive is less? They're going to pay me less. And in this case, if the interest rate goes up to 3% at the end of year 1, the value of that bond has dropped to 92,214 yen. It's a loss of 7.79%. So you can see that even these kind of small interest rate, well, it's not a small change, but those kind of interest rate changes can produce a real change in value. Let's say if it goes to 5%, and I choose this value. Right now, 5% to you might seem like some kind of incredibly high interest rate. Okay. For your lives, what's really interesting is that for the world that you've grown up in, the interest rates have been below 2% since the late 1990s. This is like your whole life. Your whole life has been these really low interest rates. This kind of 5% interest rate is normal, historically normal. And I assure you, you're going to see this again. In your lifetime, you'll see this. And you might see it sooner than you realize. So, and when this happens, there's going to be a big change in the way people value the future, and it's going to have a big effect on the value of assets now. Because when the interest rate goes back up to these historical values, the value of assets that now, if you're paying for assets now and you're expecting these kind of interest rates, low interest rates, the future, those assets are going to be worth a lot less. A lot less. And here's how much less. 5%. 5% interest rate, if it goes from 2% to 5%, that's the present value of the cash flow. You see they're lower. The value is lower. Here's the value in year 10. The total value would be 78,677 yen. If it went up to 5%, you would lose 21.32%. That's serious money. You lose 21, that's a bond. You could lose that kind of money if the interest rate changes. And this would be like a historical, this is historical. These are typical historical rates. Now I'm going to talk about the real, this is a very, very real world. This was the price of government bond yields, JGBs, yesterday. This is 24 hours ago. Went on Bloomberg, and I took this, I downloaded this and pasted this on the board, in here. These are the prices. In fact, that was like 220. That's almost exactly 24 hours ago. These are the prices. And here are the price, 10-year JGB, right here. Right there, 10-year JGB. The coupon, that's the coupon, 1/10 of 1%. That was the price. And I'll show you what that means. That means that what this 100.18 means that if the face value of the bond is 100,000 yen, that's what we're talking about here. 100,000 yen, the price is 100,180. That's what the price is. And this says the yield. This is the approximate yield. This isn't, and I'll show you it's not exact. That's not, and these show the changes. These red figures show the changes in what's called basis points. That's basis point, that's 0.01%. That says in one day, it's going to, the yield is increased 1 basis point. That's 1/100th of 1%. The yield in 1 year up 33 basis points. That means 1 year ago, on a 10-year JGB, the yield was minus 0.25%. Negative. It was a negative yield 1 year ago. For those of you that understand the implication, remember when I talked about negative interest rate? And I used the example, you could either I have 1,000 yen now, or 500 yen in the future, and you were talking about you made the joke about the BOJ, that's the BOJ, exactly. That's the BOJ. That was a year ago. It's not anymore. It's back up positive. The 2 and 5 year yields are still negative, but the 10-year yields are now positive. The 20-year yields were about zero a year ago. They're now positive. The 30-year yields were zero a year ago. A year ago, you were buying bonds. You were basically saying, here's 100,000 yen. Oh, and at the end of the 100,000 yen, you're going to give me 100,000 yen back and that's it, right? Yeah. Right. Great. Wow, cool. I guess I'll get my money back. Now, basically what you're thinking is the world's going to come to an end. If you're going to take the same amount of money 30 years from now, you have a very pessimistic view of the future. Very pessimistic. If you have that pessimistic view, give me your money, and I'll know and invest it in something, and I'll take that money and make some money, and I'll give you back that amount 30 years from now. It's a great trade. It's a pretty good trade, as far as I'm concerned. So you can find this you just go on the line. This is 24 hours a day. Trading never stops. These numbers change. 20 minutes later, all the numbers were different. 20 minutes later, I checked, they were all different. Now it's always changing. Now, the other important thing about this is if you look, you notice how the 2-year minus 0.13, 5 minus 0.07, 10, 0.08, 0.6. You see how that interest rate is rising? It's called a yield curve. And the yield curve tells us how the return on a bond changes over time. And typically, we got 0, we got 2, 5, 10, 20, and 30. And here we got, it's actually negative, probably negative. 5. Yeah, it's still negative. It's something like this. See that upward sloping? That's called a yield curve. So typically, a typical yield curve is upward sloping. The future is more valuable. The longer the bond, the more money, the more bigger return I want to get. That's called the yield curve. Very important thing to remember in finance. So now, I'm going to look at that cash flow. I wanted to see exactly, I wanted to recreate this. What I did was I recreated, let me show you, let's look at the 10-year JGB. Okay, here, see this, here, and here. I took those numbers and what I wanted to do was actually show you the real cash flow and calculate the exact yield. So I think some people would have a lot of fun doing that. It's kind of fun. So what I did was I said, okay, well, what's 1/10 of 1%? Whoa, check out the coupon. That's like, here's 100. You're giving the government 100,000 yen. I mean, that's some real money. You can go out and do something. You can take 100,000 yen out of the town here and do something. Okay. All that money, and every year the government's going to give you this. This is the coupon. Every year you get this. I don't know why they're bothering. It's 100 yen. But that's it. That's what that coupon is. That's what it means. It's 100 yen. Right there. Yeah. That's 100 exactly. 100 yen. Well, why would you even take the trouble to calculate the present value? It's almost, the amount is so small, why would I even waste my time calculating the present value? It's, I've spent more, the value of my time spent in calculating these present values is more than the cash flow. But that's what this coupon is. But that's it. I'm taking that, then I'm getting paid 100,000 yen, and here is the yield, the actual interest rate. It said 0.08, it's actually 0.084758. Calculated right down to the 3, 4, 5, 6 digits. Excel, you can do a lot. You could calculate it through the various speeds, but I just played with it to calculate exactly, so I got, because that's the price. Remember 100.18? Right there, 100.18. That's the value, 100.18. That's it. That's the cash flow. So what I did was I just basically took that, engineered to calculate that's the exact yield. That's what it is. That's that bond, that's that cash flow. That 10-year JGB. Oh, and also, it wasn't the present. This was a bond that would have been issued, and my guess is about March. So it's a 4-month-old bond. That's the other thing, is these bonds are typically what's called they're called a benchmark. It's a benchmark bond. It's the most liquid. It's the most liquid bond. It's usually at least a few months old. And my guess, and this is just a guess, it doesn't say, but I think it's about 4 months old. So the bond was issued in March. Some probably was issued. The bond was actually auctioned off in March, and now it's in July. It's trading. So this is what's going on. Okay. So you see that? Remember, I said there's the price on the previous page. So that's when you read. If you read a bond, that's what's happening. These are the numbers behind that price. That's how that value is determined. That's how the market figures this out. Again, why they waste their time calculating such little amounts of money, but that's it. That's what's going on. So that yield producing that stated price at that estimated duration, which I think is 9 years and 8 months, is that yield. Okay? Here's a 5-year. Now here's what's interesting. The yield's negative. So the yield's negative, and what this says is the present discounted value of 100 yen in the getting 100 yen 1 year in the future is 100.04. What that means is I'm going to take 10,004 yen. So I pull out. This is what these real interest rates are. Real negative interest rate. I'm pulling out 4 yen. I got 4 yen. So I got 4 yen, and I got 10,000. Okay, so I'm pulling 10,000 yen out. 10,004 yen. This is negative interest. 10,004 yen, and a year from now I get this. That's the yield. Negative yield. I got to put this much aside, 10,004 yen now, to get 10,004 yen a year from now is worth or 10,000 yen a year from now is worth 10,004 yen now. So I'd have to pay this. A year from now I get this. Yeah, I lose this. That's what I lose. That's what this means. That's what a negative interest rate is. So we still have negative interest rate. And you ask, why would anybody do it? Yes, I know. It's fascinating. It's coming to an end. It's coming to an end, and it's a big change. It's clear it's happening in the U.S. It's the end of this era is ending. I think they're talking in the EU, ECB. They haven't talked yet here, but it's going to happen, and it's going to be a big change. I don't know if we'll talk about it here. I know in my other class, second semester, I talk a lot about I talk a lot about this. in the second, interest rate policy. So, at any rate, so these are the present discounted value, and it produces that amount. Okay, and that yield is minus 1.066115. Okay, now, and now we're going to do the same thing, because now let's consider we've got the effective yield is about 0.08. Let's say it just increases to 0.2. That's only 12 basis points. That's 12 basis points. It's not very much. And it's called BIPs. If you know, it's called, the traders call it BIPs. 12 BIPs is basis. It only goes up 12 BIPs, 12 basis points. Let's say it does that in a year. That's a loss of 1%. The value of that bond will decrease by 1%, 1.07%. Only 12 BIPs. That's how sensitive. What I'm saying is that if you're holding a negative, some bond with a negative, and you're buying it with a negative yield, or a very low yield, the interest rate goes up. You're going to be shedding some tears. You're going to be crying. You're going to lose some money. Let's say if it goes to 1%. 1%, and you look at this cash flow. The interest, that's all you're getting is 100 yen. You get the 100,000 yen back. It's only worth 92,290.58. It's a loss of almost 8%. And that's only if it goes up to 1%. It's not very high. People are about to lose some serious money. And the entity that's going to lose a lot of that money is the Bank of Japan. They're going to get their, because they hold a lot of this paper. So the Bank of Japan is going to get its balance sheet blasted. So it's an interesting thing what's going to happen to the central bank's balance sheet when basically it's going to be blowing trillions of, it's basically trillions of dollars are going to blow up, or at least hundreds of billions of dollars are going to blow up. So it's a very interesting situation. It's that balance sheet is going to be damaged. 2%, if it goes to 2%, not 2%, 5%. This is historically normal. This is normal. 5% is very normal historical rate. That's the present discounted value of 2%. What you get back, 100,000 yen, how you value that. That's at the end of year 1, 9 years later, 84,491.75, you lost almost more than 15 and 2/3%. That's just going up to 2%. 5%, this is historically pretty normal stuff, guys. Historically pretty normal. And what's happening now, if there's any major event that increased risk, maybe a war or something, that's a loss of 35%. That bond, the holder of that bond, they're paying the price, they pay that price now, they're going to lose 35%. In 1 year, that's 1/3 of the value, more than 1/3. There's some serious potential losses. So this is some real, if interest rates do climb that quickly, and that means if the banks, for example, let's say, because the banks, the Japanese banks hold tons of this stuff. On their balance sheets is tons of this paper of JGBs. Governments, they've had somebody to borrow it. And the BOJ, of course, because they have zero interest rate, negative interest rates, has been buying all these bonds and forcing the price up and the interest rates below zero. But the banks hold a lot of this too. They have a lot of paper. They're going to lose. They're at risk of losing an awful lot of money. Awful lot. That, at least what it means is the value of their balance sheet. The actual value, if you're going to value that on the balance sheet, that's a lot. You may not book it. But if you're going to do a valuation of the bank's of the bank and of the bank's balance sheet, you'd have to take that into account as potential as a loss. Now we're going to talk about real estate, and what we're going to do here. The point with bonds is that we can know a lot. There's actually not a lot of risk. The bond, we know we're going to get, typically, a typical bond, we know the interest rates we're going to get, so we know the interest rate. If it's a government entity, the government is probably going to be around. We know we're going to get our money at the end. It's easy to price. Everything's very easy. And the risk is low. And that's one of the reasons why the interest rates on government bonds are lower. Interest rates on government bonds are lower because the government's going to be around. They're very likely to pay. So you don't have much, there's not much risk. Let's say if it's a piece of an income generating asset, that's a different case. So now we're going to look at an income generating, very simple form of an income generating asset in the private sector, and that's real estate. Now, my career has been, much of my business career has been in real estate, so this is something I'm familiar with, but it's also very more simple valuation. And I'm saying that so that, for example, you might someday value corporate, if you're going to value a corporation, you're going to do kind of the same thing. If you're going to value a corporation, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to try to get a sense of its cash flow. Make some projection of future profits, because that's what this is all about. One of the things you're going to see here, this is an asset that's going to generate a positive cash flow. If you have something that has a negative cash flow, it has no value. In fact, I'll relate it. I'm trying to think about if I talked about it. I remember a story that this was in the early day when there was a lot of non-performing assets and NPLs, non-performing loans. There was after the collapse of the bubble, and there were a lot of assets out that were non-performing. So there was a piece of real estate. It was a hotel, and the hotel was near a beach, like a beach somewhere in Japan, and it had a negative cash flow. So, and I remember the story. It was at one of the investment banks, and the guy told us like it was Morgan Stanley. The guy, the Morgan Stanley guy. He's going, and he's saying about how he had to go. He's going to explain to the guy. He had to go over and over again. The guy said, "Well, you got to pay me this much money." And he was saying, "Look, here's your cash flow. You have a negative cash flow. You're losing money. The building is zero value." And the guy couldn't explain. He couldn't accept it. It's a building. I have people. People come and pay money to stay. It's a negative cash flow. The contracts that he had with the workers, he couldn't change anything. He had a negative cash flow. And he said he had to meet like 4 or 5 times. And finally, the joke was, this is for a Western joke, but he said it was a come to Jesus moment. It's that come to the gods, give up, it's over. And the guy finally realized that he had an asset that had no value. He finally realized that in fact, it had no value, and the longer that he held it, the longer that it took for him to give it away, because that's what they said, let's just give it to us. Give it like a yen. Probably was like probably paid 1 yen or something for the asset. But the point was that the longer that he held the asset, the more money he was going to lose. And he finally realized that. He realized that he had something that had no value. In fact, had negative value. And that, the offer of 1 yen, the offer of nothing for the building What's a generous offer? So he finally took it. And that's, but the point is that if an asset has a negative cash flow, or no cash flow, then its value is 0. Now the interesting thing about a corporate, if you're buying a corporate asset, think about a company. And this is one of the interesting things, is you have a company like, right now Telsa, for example. If you're following Telsa on the US market, Telsa is this year's darling, Telsa is this year's darling tech stock. You know, the market's in love with Telsa. And Telsa makes electric cars.
Tesla.
Oh, Tesla. Did I say Tesla? Did I say Telsa?
Yeah, the euro mark.
Did I make, is that wrong?
Yeah, SLA. CELSLA.
My spelling is I never won any spelling bees. And
Tesla.
How do you spell it?
Electronic car products, yeah. Isn't it? Tesla.
Tesla. Well, there you go. No wonder nobody could figure it out.
Exactly.
Well, there you go. And I'm going around telling everybody Telsa. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Well, thank you for that. Now I know that it's Tesla.
Not a famous company in the US.
Yes, it's a very famous company, and it's currently valued. The number that I saw the other day was $58 billion. It's valued at $58 billion. And you know what its profits are? Negative. Its current profits are negative.
Opportunity.
So, what's going on there? How can you value a company with, because they expect, the market expects that this company is going to take over. They're valued at higher than Ford. Ford sells millions of cars. Tesla, not Telsa, Tesla sells thousands of cars. They sell expensive cars that are heavily subsidized to wealthy people. And people think that this company is worth more than Ford Motor. God bless them. But it's because of an expectation. And I have a friend, he's just so hot, he's telling me how smart he is because he bought it and he's made so much money. Okay, good. I hope he does. I like him, he's a good friend. I want him to make money. So I hope that the company doesn't lose value. But the expectation is it's going to take over the world. That's the expectation. They figure profits are going to explode. Everybody's going to want to buy electric cars. They're going to take over the world. They're going to sell millions and millions and millions of cars and make gobs of money. So they figure it's worth that. They might be right. They might be right. If they're wrong, if they're wrong, the real value is 0. If that company never makes money, its actual real value is 0. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff we're talking about here. And so, as I say, this is a simple way, just real simple asset. So we can think about these kind of bigger problems, keep that in the back of your mind. So let's say I have a building, some hypothetical residential building in Minatoku. And it's not a very big building. It's only got 20 units, 25 square meters. These are typical unit sizes in the residential market. Singles, young people typically rent these buildings out. It's only 500 square meter. This would be like a total floor area building, 600 meters. You know, it's just like a 4 or 5 story building. In typical rent, maybe 5,000 yen per square meter per month. Operating expenses, say 1,000 yen per square meter per month. Okay, these are kind of real numbers that are approximate, but they're fairly realistic. So let's say monthly cash flows, we know the first year we have leases that are signed. Let's say that we have 20 units, 25 square meters each unit, 5,000 yen per square meter per month. We get 2.5 million yen per month in revenue, and our expenses, the total expenses is 500,000 yen. So our operating profit is 2 million yen a month. Okay, so let's consider that. Let's consider that kind of cash flow. Remember here again, the building has value because the operating cash flow is positive. That's the thing here. The operating cash flow is positive. So we're going to consider that, and we're going to assume, we also have to think about is the future cash flow. We have to think about the future cash flow. This is the important thing. And this is where both the skill in figuring out what something is worth, because that's what goes on. Let's say valuing something like Tesla. I finally got that right. Valuing something like this, any company, an Amazon, whatever, or a building, I have to make a prediction. I have to make a forecast. I have to forecast what the future cash flow is. Now, the more that I know the future cash flow, the better that I have that, the lower the risk of that cash flow. The lower the risk on that cash flow. But I have to make a guess, and that's different from a bond. Japanese government bond, I don't have to make any guess. And the government's probably not going to go broke. I'm probably going to get my money back. I'm probably going to get those payments. You know, unless Kim launches a nuclear attack on Tokyo, which is not, you know, the probability is not zero. We're going to get, you know, you're going to get your money back. And that's, you know, it's kind of funny, but you know, maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, so that's a positive cash flow. That's something important to consider. Now, a positive cash flow. So we're going to look at this cash flow over a 40-year period. We're going to assume some 40-year period. The building's this. Buildings are going to be around. Most buildings are going to be around 40 years from now. You know, if the building's fairly recently constructed and it's a good construction and it's a good location, probably for the next 40 years it's going to be producing revenue. Okay. And I'm just going to say just 2% annual inflation rate, just to keep it simple. It's probably, the expenses are probably going to go up at a faster rate than the cash flow, because expenses have a way of increasing as the building gets older, and cash flow tends to go down as the building gets older. So that, but I'm just going to pretend, just to keep it simple, the same inflation rate, 2% inflation rate. So the cash flow over a 40-year period will discount the future cash flow to the present at a 5% discount rate. I'm sorry, yes, 5% interest rate, which is the same as the discount rate. Now, what are we doing here? Remember, we're talking about, this is actually pretty typical, roughly the kind of discount rate for this kind of cash flow in that part of Tokyo. No, it might be a little bit different now, but it's somewhere in this area. So, what this is it represents the perceived relative risk of this asset over the time period. And the risk is of this cash flow. And the risk is to my forecast. That's the risk. That's the risk. So whereas the bond, and it's one of the things, isn't it? Why is a government bond a low interest rate? The interest rate is lower. Because you know most everything. Everything is known. There's a lot of uncertainty. We'll go over that in just a minute. But this is what, so we're going to get, this is the present value of future cash flow. In the present value now, what we get in the future, sometime t, it could be year 1, year 2, year 10, year 20, year 40, divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the power of t, to the period when we receive, how many years in the future we receive that interest rate? I'm sorry, that expected profit. Now that should also get you to think about this. Because what you should be able to do, and maybe what it might be fun for those of you to decide whether or not you want to buy this company, the stock in this company, is, and I assure you, if you did this, you'd be doing something that was much more sophisticated than 99.99% of investors. To actually try to create a cash flow and a risk to the cash flow that would produce this value. You probably would find out you'd have to produce some really crazy numbers. You might find out how crazy the numbers you'd have to produce. So some of you, if you're thinking about this as an exercise just for fun, and you want to show it to me to show me what kind of cash flow would produce, create that kind of valuation, yeah, I'd be interested to see it. Because as I say, my friend is hot. He tells me all the time how much money he's made. and I just never have the heart to tell him how much risk he's taking. I just, I like him, and he's a nice guy, and I don't want to ruin his day. So now we're talking, let's go back to talking about this. We're talking about the same thing, it's all about cash flow. So we're talking about a cash flow. It's like water, river, flow. It comes, it keeps on coming. That's what it's a flow. So we must consider the total flow throughout the period the flow is expected to exist. So look at this asset, we're talking about 40 years, we know in year one what we're going to get, we have some guesses what we're going to get in the future beyond that. It could be wrong, but it's a guess, we have a reason to guess that. And the total value of that cash flow throughout the period the flow is expected to exist, and the anticipated cash flow is the sum of the present value of the cash flows over the period the cash flow is expected to exist. It's the sum of those cash flows. That's how we value things. We value by some. This is what we did for the bond. Pretty simple stuff. Now, I'm doing this very specifically so you can understand exactly what I'm trying to do here, what we're trying to do. So, it's the sum of the present values over the 40-year period from t equals 1 to 40 each year. What we're saying, we get a cash flow each year. How do we value that cash flow each time we get it? It's the sum of these values. The v of 1 plus r to the 1, v of 2, 1 plus r, and the r is 0.05. We've given a discount rate of 5%. It's that sum. So keep that in mind. That's the same, if you're going to do this, you're going to get some sum. Negative cash flow now, some future happiness that would produce. And the other thing is that say something like this. So we've got a 5% discount rate. The other thing is, the thing about valuing a company like this, what kind of discount rate are you going to put on a company that's negative cash flow, is only selling a few thousand, the sales are in the thousands, for a technology that's not been proven at scale, for which there is still no network to power these up. They have a pretty high discount rate. It's not 5%. It's 10%, maybe north of 10%. Try to figure out what kind of, so when you have something like that, that means that the future cash flow, some flow 10 years from now at say 10-15% discount rate is worth very little. So this is, in order to support that valuation, that's got to get something massive that's going to happen real quick. That's what we're talking about. So let's get back to here. That's that sum. And the thing is that at the higher interest rate, the higher the interest rate, the less the value of the future. So some period, if this interest rate gets high enough, 10, 12, 13%, 12, 15, 20 years from now, it's not worth very much, even if it's a big cash flow. If there's a lot of risk on that to receive that, the value now is very small. That's an important thing to keep in mind when you value things that probably many people aren't thinking about. So that's the value, the sum. The most important point here is the sum of the present values. If this sum is the value of the asset, it is what it's worth. That's its value. And I want to say to you, one of the things I'm going to say is, when I came to this country, people didn't understand this. People did not understand this. They had no idea that this was how that assets were valued this way. One of the reasons why was that companies didn't earn any money. Companies kind of ran, the real estate just went up in price because of the structure of the market. So people just assumed that it would keep on going up in price forever. They assumed the value would stay high forever. Even though they had tons and tons of debt and they weren't making any money. So when the bubble collapsed, suddenly the companies weren't making any money, they had too much debt, they were going bankrupt, the banks were going bankrupt, the real estate was collapsing in price, And suddenly people realize, oh, this. But as I say, 15 years ago, when that client came to me, I was the only guy in the market that understood this. I was sitting in a position where nobody, I was sitting in a position, I was the only one that understood this. Nobody else did. That's how recent this is. This is basic stuff, people. This is basic finance. But that's how much change we have here. It's a tremendous change, because it's all different now. People understand this. So the important thing is now you need to learn this. You need to learn this because when you go out in the market, this is what people understand. They understand this stuff. People are much more sophisticated. They're sophisticated about this stuff. So the sum of the present values represent the amount of investors willing to pay now to purchase the anticipated cash flow, because that's what you're buying. You're buying asset. You're buying you have some expectation about the cash flow, and you're putting a value on it. You're saying, here's my money. I'm going to buy that. I'm buying that cash flow. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for this. That's what that is. That's how you value assets. So to remember, what I want to point out, there's several types of uncertainty here, and you want to compare this with a bond. The risk that a bond has. The first is, we're not certain about the rent that we're going to get. Maybe there'll be so much product built, there'll be double the product. There'll be so much, and then the value, the rent might not rise, or the inflation rate might change. You might go negative, or it might go positive. There could be, if the inflation rate goes up, then the rents are going to go up more, and that's positive. That's positive for real estate. But there's a lot of uncertainty. There's uncertainty in the expenses that the owner would need to pay. That's going to be depending on the inflation rate. So there's that uncertainty. So there's uncertainty in the length the cash flow will be available. Well, maybe 30 years from now, maybe there's going to be an earthquake. Maybe an earthquake and the building gets destroyed. Now you're going to rebuild the building, but you might lose that cash flow. Or maybe in that part of the city, nobody wants to live there anymore. Maybe it changes, the character changes, and instead of being a place where wealthy people want to live, it becomes a place where only poor people live. These things happen. That's the kind of risk that's out there. Maybe nobody wants to buy electric cars. Maybe it turns out that the technology doesn't develop as fast as they think. Maybe the governments decide that they're not going to support and to provide the subsidies. There's all kinds of things. That's all risk. It's all risk, and that's all priced here. That's where it's priced, right there. Knowing this, putting a number and saying why, that's everything. Because you're understanding what all the risk is. You're understanding what this is. So I've said the uncertainty, the length of cash will be available, the uncertainty in the discount rate, the perceived risk may change. If that company, it turns out that the technology doesn't develop, the battery technology doesn't develop as fast as possible, then it might be worthless. And then or tomorrow there's some brilliant invention which makes storing electricity in batteries zero cost in a compact unit that can power for 100 years. Let's say some incredible invention that nobody was anticipating. Then suddenly that becomes cheap. So that's part of the risk, that's volatility. It could be low, it could be high. Same thing here. There's uncertainty in the discount rate. The amount of risk can change. Things can change over time. All of these imply risk. And risk is, you have an expectation, you have some expectation of a cash flow. And the risk is the range of possible outcomes around around your expectation. That's your it's called volatility. It's the amount of volatility. Did I spell that right? I think so. I spell a lot of things wrong. Volatility. Volatility, that means that the more variance, the more the standard deviation. Standard deviation, if you see this, if you haven't seen this yet, you're going to see this in statistics. Standard deviation variance, that's around some expectation. You expect something, and the volatility, the variance, is the possible outcomes around the expectation. And the wider the range in the possible outcomes around the expectation, the more the risk, and the higher the discount rate. So in a government bond, there's very little risk, there's very little volatility around the expectation, unless Kim launches that bond. But, so that's why the interest rate's lower, and why that's higher here. Now what we're going to do, look at, I'm going to compare that with the bond yield, because this gives us a good clue about how risk, ways to think of how risk is different. This is that bond, 100,000, 180 yen, current yield 0.084758%. That's that cash flow. Okay, we have complete certainty about the interest payment. It's not very high. Every year I get this. Oh, I get this, but I know I'm going to get it. You know, and my mother would say, "Don't spend it all in one place." There's complete certainty about expenses. What are the expenses? Zero. There's no expense. There's no expense in a bond. It's just a piece of paper. It's just a legal piece of paper. No, I don't have to pay anybody to. I just put it in my drawer. I guess I would pay the bank to store it in a safe. That might be an expense, maybe. Or I could just buy my own safe, and that might consider it. But there really is no expense. There's complete certainty in the cash flow length. It's 10 years. I know I'm going to get paid on a certain date, exactly the day, I know the exact date I'm going to get paid. There's no uncertainty about that. There's only thing that there's complete certainty in the value of the bond at maturity. Government's going to give me that much money. They said that. You know, this isn't Argentina. This isn't. It's not Greece. It's not Argentina. It's a country that honors its debt obligations. But there is, however, uncertainty in the discount rate the market will be willing to pay for this expected cash flow in the future. That's the only risk. But if I hold it to maturity, you know, I don't care. If I'm going to hold that to the end anyway, I'm not really worried about that. So the point is, there's a lot less risk. A lot less risk. And that implies this lower yield, which is the discount rate. This is the yield is the discount rate. This is the risk. The market says that this is almost zero risk. It's nothing. It's risk-free. It's almost risk-free. It's like they're telling you that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. The expectation is the Earth is going to continue to go around the sun. It's pretty good guess. You know, I'll bet that that's going to happen. That's kind of it. It's you know maybe there'll be a supernova and there's something that will destroy life on Earth. It won't matter. But I mean, this really that's the idea. It's very low risk. Now, this is pretty detailed, but what I want to do is when you run these kind of numbers, this is the kind of thing that you deal with. And also, I'll tell you that when I did my valuations, I did monthly. I took monthly. Because the cash flow came every month, so I took monthly cash flow. You know, I had to discount it, not by year, but by month, which actually produced a little bit higher value. That was another little trick. Which, of course, it made sense. So I was able to produce a value that was a little bit higher. Which the banks, the lenders liked it, the client liked it, everybody liked it. And it was real. I wasn't cheating, you know. I was just more precise, so I produced a higher value. But this is, we're going to just create annual value. So what we have is expected revenue, expected expenses, net income, this kind of value. And that's at a 5% discount rate. So 40-year cash flow, 5% discount rate. 1 year from now, I'm going to get that cash flow, I'm going to get 24 million 1 year from now. 5% discount rate, I value this. Second year, it's a little bit more cash flow because of inflation. This is my expectation. Expecting this inflation for expenses, this for revenue. It's going to go up. There's a risk to that. It may or may not happen. Or it may be bigger, it may be smaller. These numbers may not act. That's the skill. The skill of an analyst is to do better evaluation, the better you are at pricing, the more realistic your assumptions. And also you can test, for Tesla, the value that you can run these numbers and see does that make sense. So that's the kind of thing also. The numbers make sense. They're kind of making sense. We've got some, like 10 years from now, we're expecting 35 million instead of 30 million. Up to 7 million expenses. We've got some inflation. But it's about 2%. It's kind of what we're getting now. But look how the discount value is slowly going down. Even though our expected revenue is slowly going up, the present value of those future cash flows, of that increased cash flow is falling in the present, because the further we go in the future, the less the value that we put on it now. Because in 10 years from now, what is our expectation we're going to get exactly this? The further out we go, the further out, the further the range of possible outcomes. That's what happens. Your possible outcomes grow and grow and grow, so it could be up there or it could be down there. So as that, even though the income is growing, the present discount value is slowly falling. Notice how we go to 10, 20, these cash flows are growing, the expenses are growing, the net income is growing, but the present value keeps on falling. And then we're saying 20 years from now, we're expecting 34,968,468 yen. Okay. What's that value now? 13,177,363. That's what we're going to pay for it now. That's what we value it now. Because that's what we're buying. If we buy the building, that's what we're paying. We have that expectation, and that's it. We're paying that much for that cash flow 20 years from now. That's what we're buying. That's part of what we're buying, is that cash flow 20 years from now. That's what we're buying. We go to the year 30. Again, 53 million, we're well into doubling the income. Doubling the expense. Expenses have gone up too. Net income is over 42 million. But 9,861,370 present discounted value, it's less than half of, and this is something we're almost certain to get. Because we have tenants. We have tenants, we have cash flow. This is very uncertain 30 years from now. Very uncertain. And now, the last 10 years of the cash flow. 40-year cash flow, discount rate. Is that right? Get that? Oh, no, did I? Something's not right. Oh, I put the wrong. Oh, I just caught that too. I did this last night, sorry. This number's right. I'll have to change that, sorry. Slipped that, boy. That should be, I just recreated it. I forgot to put the number. That would be, it's out there though. I just have to put that in. Right, okay. I'll have to change that. Those numbers are bigger. But the point is that this total, add up all the 40-year period. Now the reality is that at the end of 40 years, we're either still going to have a building or we're going to own the land and we can build a new building. So in fact, actually, there's going to be cash flow beyond this. And if you're really going to do this analysis properly, you either, at this point, you estimate the value of the building or the cost of building a new building and the value of the new building. and then you would bring that to the present value. That would be what's called the terminal value. But that's a little bit too complicated. I don't want you to worry about that. I just want you to think about just pure cash flows. In fact, the other way to do it is we just extend the analysis until it's so far in the future, like 100 years, and that the present value is basically zero. You know, you go far enough in the future and the present value is going to be more or less zero, and then that's kind of the same thing. It's kind of the same thing. So anyway, so that's what it adds up to. 549,086,000. Yeah. That was actually the zeros too. It's interesting. But at any rate, the point is that cash flow, or if you're buying it for a 40-year period, that's what you pay for it. That's what the value. That's where value comes from. So if you see the value of a building, you see the value of something, the value of this company, the value of the building, the value of any kind of asset, income-producing asset. Hopefully from now on, you see that this is what this is what you're thinking. You're thinking of this. You're thinking about these cash flows. You're thinking about where that came from and how, and you want to start thinking about, is that right? Does that make sense? Because when you can do that, it's very powerful. It's a very, very powerful skill. And as I say, I can teach you a lot of things in this class, but I think that this, of all the things you can learn here, the thing and the possibility that you'll be using some aspect of this, 1, 2, 3, 4 of you, how many, some number of you out there right now, I'm going to find out 5 years from now you're going to be doing something that involves this. Some way. This or some of the other, but this is at least one person in this class, I will bet. At least one person here is going to be using the skill, using present value, using all of this, and to earn a living. It's very powerful. Very powerful way to think about the world. So that is that's that. We'll have some exercises so that you can understand. Now we just have a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to introduce. I think we have. Let's stop here. I think it's right. This goes to 250. Right. We just a few seconds. I'll just introduce. We're going to talk about land and land markets. I've been talking about real estate, and the point there is that that's an idea, because I have been talking about real estate. But we're going to talk just in terms of land markets, what they are, what the term rent, what that means when economists talk about rent, and I'll talk a little bit about value. We talked a little bit about value, but that's the idea of what land value, where the value of land comes from. So, okay, we'll close it there, and I'll be working on getting. I've got a couple of your exercises. Be working on getting some of that back to you this week, and getting caught up on some of that, so you'll have a better. I think you have a good idea where you're at anyway. But we'll start getting that to you, and let's see. And I still haven't taken a look at what you turned in last week, and I said because it was late getting that to you this week, you have until next week to turn this week's assignment in. So you still have another week for that. So thank you. And see the temperature. I think at 24 degrees, people stay awake. Yeah, they should. Yeah, we got. Well, but you've already pretty much done this assignment now. You're almost complete, I'm sure. So this will mean that. I mean, that's the proper way to think about it. But it's been a while since I've been a student. I know that last year I had an assignment, and I asked you to go out and walk up and down Motesando Dori. And I said, well, you don't have to do it this week. You can sometime whenever you want during the semester. So you know when everybody turned it in? The last minute on the last day. Everybody.